Okay, so you know how we're always diving into these big ideas about the future?
Right.
Well, this time we're going really big.
Like really big.
We're talking space,
Space, like outer space.
outer space, specifically space-based solar power.
Now, that's a topic that's been floating around for decades.
It has, but it's always felt kind of like, science fiction.
A bit out there, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But just what? It might be a lot closer to reality than we think.
Oh, what's changed?
Well, there's this company, Aetherflux, and get this. It was founded by Ba Youbot,
Wait, Ba Youbot, the Robinhood Ba Youbot.
the one and only.
Wow, from stock trading apps to space solar, that's quite a leap.
Right. You almost think he was bored with just disrupting one industry.
I mean, it's not every day you see that kind of crossover. What made him set his sights on space solar?
That's a great question, and to be honest, that's what we're here to unpack today.
Sounds like a fascinating deep dive.
It really is. But before we get too deep into Aetherflux and their plans, let's talk about why space solar is even a thing.
Good point. We should probably start with the basics.
Exactly. So we've got this giant fusion reactor in the sky, the sun, providing us with, a ton of energy. Why not just capture that energy here on Earth?
Well, the Earth's atmosphere actually absorbs and reflects a significant amount of the sun's energy. And then there's the whole day and night cycle, not to mention cloudy days.
Right. It's not always sunny in Philadelphia or wherever.
Exactly. So space-based solar power kind of bypasses all of that. Up in space, you have constant sunlight, no atmospheric interference, and a much larger surface area to collect energy.
I see the appeal. But hasn't this been tried before?
It has. There were a few attempts in the past, but they mostly fizzled out.
Why is that? What went wrong?
Well, for starters, those early projects were incredibly expensive.
Yeah, space is not exactly known for being budget-friendly.
It's true. And the technology back then just wasn't as advanced. Plus, they were talking about these massive satellites in geostationary orbit, which is like 22,000 miles above Earth. Getting something that big up there is a huge logistical challenge.
So Aetherflux is doing something different.
They are. They're taking a much more practical approach. Instead of one giant satellite, they're starting with something much smaller, about the size of a refrigerator, actually.
A refrigerator in space.
Pretty much. And they're not aiming for geostationary orbit either. They're going for low Earth orbit, which is only about 500 kilometers up.
That seems a lot more manageable.
Right. It's all about proving the technology works first. Think of it as their minimum viable product, their MVP for space-based solar power.
It's interesting how they're applying startup principles to something as, let's say, ambitious as space solar.
Exactly. It's a totally new way of thinking about it.
Okay, so they've got this mini-fridge satellite up in low Earth orbit. How do they actually get the energy back down to us?
Now, this is where it gets really cool. They're using a high-powered infrared laser.
A laser beam. From space.
You got it. They beam the energy from the satellite to a receiving station on Earth.
Hold on. Lasers beaming power from space. That sounds a little too sci-fi even for this conversation.
I know, right? But that's the plan.
I have to admit, it's a pretty cool plan. But realistically, how much power are we talking about here? Can this little satellite power a city, a town, a house?
Not quite. This first mission is really more about proving the concept.
A sort of look ma, no wires kind of demonstration.
Exactly. They want to show that they can transmit energy from space using a laser safely and reliably. The actual power output is expected to be around 1 kilowatt.
1 kilowatt, huh? What would that even power? A hairdryer?
Maybe a really high-powered one. Think more along the lines of a dishwasher.
Okay, so maybe not powering the eastern seaboard just yet.
Not just yet.
But it's a start. So let's say this test run is a smashing success. What's next for Aetherflux? What's the grand vision here?
Well, if this first mission goes well, they're talking about putting a whole bunch of these satellites up there.
A whole bunch, huh? So not just one mini fridge, but like a whole fleet of them.
Exactly, a whole constellation. They'd be strategically positioned, working together.
I'm picturing like a string of Christmas lights. But instead of lights, it's solar-powered refrigerators beaming energy back to Earth.
It's not a bad analogy, actually.
But even with a constellation, wouldn't the power output still be pretty small? I mean, we're talking about maybe replacing fossil fuels someday, powering entire countries, all right?
Well, sure, but you got to start somewhere, right? And Aetherflux is really thinking about this from a scalability perspective.
Scalability. So how do they plan on going from a kilowatt here and there to, powering the grid?
That's where their focus on using existing technology comes in.
Existing technology. So they're not trying to reinvent the wheel.
Exactly. They're taking things like solar panels, lasers, stuff that we already know works, and they're making it, space-ready.
So it's less about inventing something completely new and more about refining what we already have.
Right. It's a much more practical approach and honestly, probably a lot more appealing to investors.
Okay, that makes sense. But speaking of investors, let's talk about the cost for a second. Launching things into space isn't exactly cheap. How is Aetherflux planning on making all of this commercially viable?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or maybe more like the billion-dollar question when it comes to space. But see, that's one of the big differences with Aetherflux. They're not asking for a massive investment up front. They're taking a more measured approach, a phased approach.
So less, give us billions of dollars to build a giant satellite, and more, let's start small, prove it works, and then scale up.
Exactly. It's a much more sustainable model and frankly, probably a lot less risky for investors.
Right, because no one wants to be the one who threw billions of dollars at a project that, well, didn't quite get off the ground.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about the how of Aetherflux's plan, but I think it's time we dug a little deeper into the why. Why space-based solar? What are the big advantages?
Well, it really comes down to the unique advantages that space offers for collecting solar energy. Up there, you have this unlimited source of energy. The sun is always shining. There's no atmosphere to weaken the rays.
And no clouds.
And no clouds. It's like having a giant solar panel in the sky, soaking up energy 24/7.
It's kind of poetic when you think about it. So are we talking about like completely ditching all other forms of energy here on Earth, replacing everything with space solar?
Not necessarily. Think of it more as another tool in the toolbox.
Okay, so not a replacement, but a supplement.
Exactly. It could work in tandem with other renewable sources, things like wind and solar, to create a more resilient and sustainable energy system.
A sort of all of the above approach to energy.
Right. And this is where it gets really exciting because one of the biggest challenges with renewable energy here on Earth is that it's not always reliable.
Sure, the sun isn't always shining, the wind isn't always blowing.
Exactly. But in space, it's always sunny. Space-based solar could provide a consistent baseload of power regardless of what's happening down here on Earth.
Okay, that does sound pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But I also have to ask, are there any downsides? I mean, we're talking about beaming high-powered lasers from space. That seems, I don't know, maybe a tiny bit dangerous.
It's a valid concern for sure.
What if it goes off course? What if there's a malfunction? People watch movies. We've seen how this could go wrong.
Of course, safety is a huge priority. Aetherflux knows that. But they've designed their laser technology to be incredibly precise, highly focused.
So it's not like these lasers are just, indiscriminately zapping things from orbit.
No, not at all. Plus, there are all sorts of international regulations and agreements in place to govern this kind of activity in space.
So it's not like the Wild West up there. There are rules.
Oh yeah, there are definitely rules. Aetherflux has to go through all the proper channels, get all the necessary permissions, and ensure that everything they're doing is safe and legal before they launch anything into space.
That's good to hear. It's reassuring to know that someone's looking out for us down here on Earth while all this space stuff is going on.
Absolutely.
But it's not just about the technical and safety aspects, is it? I mean, if Aetherflux is successful in making space-based solar power a reality, we're talking about a massive shift, not just in how we power our homes and businesses, but potentially even global politics.
Oh, absolutely. This could be huge, like a paradigm shift.
So space solar is not just about, cleaner energy. It could actually reshape the world as we know it. That's a pretty big deal.
It is a pretty big deal. Think about it. For as long as we've been around, energy has been a driving force in global politics, right? Wars have been fought over it, treaties have been signed because of it, and now we're talking about a future where countries could potentially get clean and abundant energy from space.
That's like something out of Star Trek.
Right. It's almost hard to wrap your head around. But imagine if we could reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and level the playing field a bit when it comes to energy access.
Okay, that all sounds incredibly optimistic. But, there's always another side of the coin.
What do you mean?
Well, if space-based solar really takes off, it's going to disrupt a lot of powerful interests. I mean, think about the oil and gas industry. They've been running the show for decades.
You're not wrong. There's definitely going to be pushback. Anytime you try to change the status quo, especially when it comes to something as big as energy, well, let's just say there are going to be some people who aren't happy about it.
That's an understatement if I've ever heard one. I mean, we're talking about industries that are worth trillions of dollars.
It's true. But at the same time, you have to wonder, with all that potential resistance, why would someone like Ba Youbot even want to get involved in this? I mean, he made his fortune in fintech. He could be on a beach somewhere right now.
Sipping Mai Tais, counting his Robin Hood stock?
Exactly. But instead, he's decided to jump into the world of space solar. It makes you think.
Yeah, it does make you think. Maybe he sees this as an even bigger opportunity. Or maybe he just wants to make a real difference in the world.
I mean, you don't launch a company like Aetherflux unless you really believe in what you're doing.
That's true. Okay, so let's say Aetherflux figures out all the technical challenges, makes space-based solar safe and reliable, overcomes all the political and economic hurdles. What does that future actually look like? Are we all going to have these little mini satellites in our backyards?
I don't know about that. Maybe someday. But Aetherflux's vision, at least for now, is a little more grounded.
Grounded for a space company.
Well, you know what I mean? They're not trying to power every single house with a dedicated satellite. What they're talking about is providing power at a larger scale. Think about things like providing energy to remote areas or disaster relief efforts, places that don't have access to traditional power grids.
So instead of everyone having their own personal solar-powered satellite, it's more about using this technology to create a more distributed and resilient energy system.
Exactly. It's about providing power where it's needed most in a way that's sustainable and reliable.
I have to say, when we started this deep dive, I thought we were going to be knee-deep in science fiction. But honestly, what Aetherflux is doing feels a lot more like science fact.
It's exciting, isn't it?
It is. It's a reminder that the future is full of possibilities, and sometimes those possibilities are closer than we think. Who would have guessed that the future of energy might be floating around right above our heads? So the next time you look up at the night sky and see those stars, think about the incredible potential that's up there, just waiting to be unlocked. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and who knows, maybe you'll be the one to discover the next big thing that changes the world.